Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Making the Cut. And I would like to introduce Helen and Dave. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. This is an episode on AI and culture.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having us here. We co founded the Artificiality Institute, and our focus is on how to stay human with this AI transition. When we say stay human, we actually mean that it's about using technology because we've always used technology as part of being human. So we think a lot about what it will mean to incorporate these cognitive, creative technologies, emotional technologies into work and into life, into parenting, into going to see the doctor or the lawyer, those sorts of things. And we study people's psychological adaptation to that journey.
What she said.
I think it's so fascinating what you guys do. And AI completely scares is the wrong word. It's a little confusing and a little simple all at the same time at this stage for me and how I apply it to my life. But one of my questions is, and we were talking about this earlier, is on Helen, on one of your Instagram reels, you say how AI is intelligent. Speak more a little bit about that. And if AI is intelligent and it's only going to get more and more and more intelligent rapidly, how do we counterbalance that to stay human?
Well, a lot of people really hate the idea that AI is intelligent, and they hate it for a lot of reasons. They hate it because somehow it takes away human exceptionalism. They hate it because it reflects on the fact that we don't have an awesome definition for intelligence. They don't like the idea of AI being intelligent for all sorts of quite good reasons. But the evidence is pretty overwhelming that it is a kind of intelligence. It has learned all of the patterns of many of the patterns of our interaction, whatever can be found online, whether it's images and video and text, and to the point that those patterns can be well reflected back to us. And anyone who spent time talking to some of the really, the modern chatbots like ChatGPT and Claude and whatnot, Gemini, the experience of speaking with an intelligent thing is definitely there. Now, is it the same kind of intelligence as us? No, no. It does a good job at mimicking it. It's a different kind of intelligence. And in the same way that a dog is a different kind of intelligence. Or if we ever meet them, an alien is a different kind of intelligence. A bacteria is a different kind of intelligence. It's able to achieve its goals, which is to respond back to us. Now, that being said, the reason that this is so disruptive is that it is a really cognitive technology that gets inside our thinking. And that is also part of its intelligence, is its relational situation to us.
Yeah. And I think everybody that is novice in this, and when I say novice, it's generally 95% of people I think are novice, but um, you go right to my job is going to be replaced or humans are going to be made completely redundant in the next 5 years. Your mind goes right there. And at the end of the day, when it's a doomsday scenario like that, for me, I always look at it like, well, we'll all be in the same boat anyway. So we're going to have to solve the problem will have to be solved. However, more importantly, I suppose to that question is I don't believe that's a reality. And I don't believe it just on a social level and on a consumer level, because I feel that there will be two camps. There will be the camp that loves the whole AI thing and goes for that experience. And I feel that the human touch experience will be something that's more curated, something that's more elevated. But I believe what will happen is sort of two camps. And you're seeing it, I think, at retail. So when I say this, my background being apparel, yes, retail has changed a lot over since e-commerce. However, the retailers that understood what was happening have exploded. So Aritzia being one of them, and they're a Vancouver-based billion-dollar company now. And they expanded into the US at the peak of e-commerce, like in 2010, I think he started in New York. And that's not an easy thing to do. And now they are really a well-known global brand. So Lululemon, another Vancouver-based brand, they all have money behind them, but I'm bringing these up because they also did start small. I feel that there's going to be, and correct me or let me know if I'm on the right path, that there are going to be two different kind of camps. But then that makes my conspiracy theory mind go, isn't that the whole plan of the, 13 families running the world anyway?
Let's see. I think there's a couple of there's a lot embedded in that, right? So the quick reaction to if AI is intelligent, which we believe it is, but we have a very expansive view of intelligence. So I think that unless you believe that humans and human intelligence is the only form of intelligence in the world, then it's pretty hard to say that these tools do not have a form of intelligence, right? And we have very expansive. But it's easy to say, well, if it's intelligent, then it's gonna match human intelligence and it's gonna replace us. People jump to that because that's what all the big AI companies are saying. They're using human intelligence as the design spec. So they're sitting there saying, we're going to make a thing, and the thing we're going to try and make it like is like a human. And we find that to be wildly unimaginative because these AI models operate in a combinatorial space that is completely different from us. We think in 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 dimensions, and then our brain kind of breaks. Computers can think in unlimited dimensions. They see patterns across dimensions of data that there's no way we can even comprehend it. So I find it to be wildly unimaginative to take something that can contemplate that kind of data and try and make it like us. We're just fundamentally different kinds of computational systems, in whatever level you want to put it at. So there's that sort of challenge with the overall narrative. But what it does do is it makes the AI seem like either the savior that's going to save you and save the world and save humanity, or it's the ultimate evil. And so it's the thing that you can't touch ever. And so you end up with these two camps right now. One is essentially a religion where it's worshiping the tools and the people making it. And the other is putting yourself inside a fortress and trying to keep it out. We feel like that's just not the only two options in the world. It doesn't have to be that way. We can design these tools differently. We can also be quite cautious and careful about how we use them to make it something that works for us, not against us.
So I
Right.
would say there's three ways, that there's three camps. I'm not a big believer in relying on the human touch to create an economy. I think that the human touch is a normal good. It becomes more valuable as there's more wealth in society. That's why, expensive restaurants, high-end restaurants have more service people. So it will be like that. But I think it's the job situation and the relevance situation and the tasks and the things that people do and what they value will be quite a mix of what is uniquely human and what is very much an enhanced human AI outcome of some sort, output of some sort, an artifact or a process or a product, something like that. And that in 10 years from now, we won't necessarily care about what's AI versus what's human. We would have constructed entirely new ideas about that. That's yet to come.
Mhm.
We're in the disruption right now. And like Dave said, we have a very, very, very narrow narrative coming out of very, very few companies and very, very few people. And that narrative is extremely powerful. It has a massive competitive advantage, which is that everything is able to be put into metrics. Those metrics are benchmarked against things that we measure about humans. And then we forget everything else about humans that we can't measure or that we don't measure or that resist measurement or that we despise measuring. So it's very much what the philosopher T. Nguyen says, value capture, that we believe that the metric is all there is. That's why we believe that the metrics around artificial general intelligence are all there is. And like Dave said, AGI is the design spec, be as good as a human and don't make silly mistakes along the way. And then, by the way, there's all these other things that AI can do that humans can't, which is conveniently not talked about that much because actually that's the most interesting part.
Well, and there's all kinds of things that humans can do that we can't measure, and therefore we can't design a machine to do. Like what Helen just said, something you smiled, you reacted. That's not measured. There isn't any way to calculate that. There's no metric that they're designing an AI for it. Did it put out text in a way that makes you go, or any of those other things that we constantly are finding value in? Those are not in the machine. So thinking that the machine is going to be able to replace all of that richness, all of that color, all of that messiness, all of that beauty of humanity is just a bad idea in my mind. So it has a role and a value, but it's not what we are.
No, and it's art comes up again. I had done this podcast and I had said I really believe art is the, it's the brick wall, it's where the buck stops, in the sense of it's the one place, that there is no, it's the truth. Whoever is putting out that art, it's the truth. And I do believe it will be the artists that dictate that line. Like, for example, I personal essay write for a hobby, which I haven't done for a while, but the New York Times, the different publication, I mean, it is, if you chat GPT anything in your cover letter, it goes through whatever AI checks if what you've written is AI. And they don't even bother getting back to you. So there's sort of that benchmark of standard that art in all its forms, I feel, is that gatekeeper of excellence, like keeping excellence at a standard. You know what I mean? And which takes me into film with sort of what you do. You listen to people like Matthew McConaughey has IP'd himself, right? Or trademarked his self. What is the worry people have in film? The real worry that there might be for anybody that's in crew or actors or any of that stuff, screenwriters.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. And I think there's some very valid concerns, no question about it. There is I'll start with the base sort of broad level concern for me, is that this technology change is unclear whether it will be something that will create more roles or reduce the number of roles. And I'll allow for that possibility because in previous technology transitions, we have made it easier to create things. We have made it faster. We've made it more efficient. But most of these things, we've created more space and more roles for creators. So for context, long ago, I was involved in creating Final Cut Pro and Logic and GarageBand and a variety of things in the music and TV and film industries. Most of those, I think pretty much exclusively all of those, massively expanded the opportunity space. And that was in part because the ability to distribute those technology, those creations became much easier. It became much faster. It became, you didn't have to just put something up and wait for somebody to go to the movie theater to watch a movie. Now you're sending it to every individual's phones, right? So we had a much more capability to create more and have it get sent to more people. We also, though, I had more time to spend on consuming that content. I don't know whether those kinds of larger societal sort of external dynamics will be there to support the creation of much more. We don't have that much more time to watch, at least it's not apparent. We don't have that many more places to put creations where we might want to consume them. So there's sort of a weird dynamic about that. All of that means that if we suddenly now have an ability to create the backdrop for an ad, and traditionally it would be shot on the street in New York City, and you'd hire a whole bunch of extras, and you'd have a whole bunch of people in the shot. You'd have people driving cars. You'd have all of the gaffers. You'd have all of the crew. If that can be generated generatively with just technology, there's that whole portion of the creative industry of people that won't necessarily have a job in that production. And we don't know what that means overall for all of it. There's also this question of what it means for your individual contribution. And so I totally understand where McConaughey and so forth are coming from, but there's a small elite group of stars who are always going to have a role because there's a certain number of people that will just go see anything that he makes. But he is also such a distinctive character that people want to mock him all the time or mimic him. I don't mean to be making fun of, but he's so, like it's one of those great things for comics to pretend to be Matthew McConaughey. So he's going to try and protect himself because that is his value. And then there's a broader question of whether we actually want any of these creations, right? Right now, we're generally seeing slop, as it's become called, right? Some of that is because it's generated by a computer and not a human. And so therefore that's sort of a distinction. But to be honest, a lot of human creations aren't that great either. So there's a lot of human slop that exists in the world too. Let's not put ourselves out there that everything we create is fantastic. When it's your child, of course, it's all incredible art. But then once we become adult, we have to sort of, separate ourselves out. But then there's this sort of question whether the human spirit has to be about it, whether you have to be watching an actual human or not, those kinds of questions. And we don't really know the answer to that yet. It's still very early. We don't know what this is going to be like. I was actually we were talking about it earlier today that I was remembering back, was sort of thinking about a comparison. And one that came to top of mind was when I first saw Luxo Jr. It's the little short that John Lasseter and team made at Pixar of the lamp, and it's about 2 minutes. You can find it all over the place. There's actually it's the Hewitt Museum. I think that's right. Has it up on their site, and it's a lamp that dances, and then there's a little one that shows up and it bounces on a ball and it squishes the ball, and you have this emotional reaction watching these lamps. There's no words. There's a little bit of sort of sound to it. It's not a person, but you definitely feel it. People feel sad when they watch Wall-E. It's not a human. So the question is whether we'll react that same way when it might not be as a human or as much of a human, or it might be assisted by a computer to create the story. Will that still help? Will we still feel that way about something, or does that not hold?
Yeah, it's in my industry, education, they're obviously already talking about robots or, well, yeah, basically robots coming in and teaching. So a human writes the curriculum. We're a small boutique school. So for me, it's, we'll always have a human doing it, but they're already talking about it, replacing that. Nursing. I mean, I'm 57 and I tell you, when they make a robot that's like a companion robot that, can play chess with me, that can play cards, I'm down. I am right there to buy that robot. But that's also something that I wanted to talk about is what is the biggest shift you guys see that AI is making? For me, it's not AI, but technology. And because I'm not as well versed in AI as you guys, but seeing the shift in generations with, again, having a school and seeing 40-year-olds take our classes versus the early 20-year-olds that take our classes versus seeing the teens, and seeing where the attention span is, or social skills, or just manners. And I don't mean manners like good manners or bad manners, but just in general society, kind of how you conduct yourself, which it's affected. And I'm curious to see what you guys think is the largest shift you see happening that AI is making, and in regards also socially, where you see it kind of taking it over the next year to 5 years.
Yeah, well, the big one that I see happening that is not talked about a lot, but is the one that I see the most, is how much more people are able to do, how much they're able to reach into different cognitive spaces, if you like. They can use AI to take them to reframe different meanings for them. Their identity shifts when they work with AI for a long time, or when they're highly collaborative with AI. So it's in that psychological reaction to the tools, to using AI as like a co-author. The downside of that is that you don't want to leave. So this part is talked about a lot and is kind of an extension of what we've found from social media, but I think is much stronger. The tools are well known as being somewhat sycophantic. So you could spend a long time with Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, doing work, thinking things, exploring things, getting therapy, asking advice, planning your travel, whatever it is. And it's not that you lose touch with reality, it's just you lose touch with other people. And it's much nicer and easier and just more comforting to go to that interface, to that tool, and start typing or talking or whatever, than it is to go and find a real human that is annoying, a bit friction, isn't paying attention. So I think that that's the greatest thing that we see. The downside is talked about quite a lot because we all love to talk about downsides. The upside is getting lost in the wash, and there aren't that many examples that people can point to. But that's the one it also tees off the most from our current social media discourse, where everyone's extremely sensitive to how we've been polarized and put in filter bubbles and whatnot. And we've lost the ability to talk to each other, lost the ability to find common negotiation ground, for example. So I think that's the biggest change. And I can't see that genie going back in the bottle. Have to actually learn how to not do those things. We'll have to learn how to be better.
Is there anything to be a little concerned about, in the sense that I know a few young adults, 25 to 30, that put everything into ChatGPT? They put all their emails into ChatGPT. They ask ChatGPT all their questions. They record their conversations, upload it into their ChatGPT, so that their ChatGPT knows them better and can write their emails, tell them what their preferences are in whatever thing they're looking at. I see it's a bit concerning. Like, if you've done that and you say, what should I do in my relationship with James, in
Well, I
ChatGPT.
mean, it's that example is existential. No question. I mean, that is an existential shift for those people. They have lost the ability to author themselves, to form their own goals, to make hard choices where they back and commit to those choices and they form the person that they can form. They're just going to form whatever ChatGPT has them form. At the risk of making a value judgment, I think that's a really dumb idea, because the whole point of personalization is to make you more predictable. And it's kind of a spiral into just becoming a more predictable person. And we don't know how that's going to play out, because you can never prove a counterfactual. Someone could be on their deathbed and say, I'm so glad I spent so much time with Chat. And someone else could be on their deathbed and say, what the hell was I thinking? This life that I was given, and I have no idea what the other person could have been. So the skills that need to be taught are what we call cognitive sovereignty, which is where you are the author of your mind, whether you're the author of your life. You're still able to set goals. You're still able to know your preferences. And that doesn't mean you know them all the time. That doesn't mean they're always clear. Half the time, none of us know what we actually want. We think we do, and then we try it and it doesn't work. But that's the human condition, is the evolution of those goals, the evolution of those preferences, the fact that they're latent and they can be pulled out of you with different experiences, the fact that they can reform themselves if you make a particular commitment to making something succeed. Having a large language model that you may or may not believe to be sentient, that you certainly believe is somewhat anthropomorphic, somewhat human-like, do that work for you, is the ultimate value capture. It's the ultimate way of not being a human. You kind of turned yourself into the robot.
Right.
The reason that I think the core reason that people get into this, and is because the value of AI and what it can do with you, for you, is based on the context that it has. If you open up a brand new account in any of these systems and you ask it a really interesting question, it'll give you a very generic answer. But if it has a lot of memory about who you are, what you do, what you've said before, what kinds of decisions you've made at work or at home, it has a lot of context about you. And so the next time you ask it a question, or say, hey, can you draft a response to this email, because I don't really feel like we're writing it and I don't really care, but I just need to get something back to somebody. It can be much more valuable because it already has the context, and you don't have to write the entire context of your life in that prompt to get to do something. But the risk factor comes is that we say that we're transitioning from an attention economy, right? So the social media, wave created this attention economy where the economy is based on what we pay attention to. And we get stuff for free, social media feeds and content and videos and cutesy things and videos of cats, because we pay attention to them. And that industry's done a really good job of fracking our attention into little commoditizable bits and auctioning off to the highest bidder. And they suck you in and keep you there as long as possible. Now, apply that form of extractive capitalism to the intimacy economy, where these tools have an intimate understanding of you. They know all of your history. They know what you like, what you don't like, and it knows your hopes and dreams. What can it extract from you when these tools know all of that? And we already know that the couple of the major tool companies and vendors have said that they'll be advertising to users based on what it knows about you in your chats. You get free access to the tool, and it advertises to you based on what it knows. Now, how they're going to do that, and how they're going to, when you ask a good question about, I was just experimenting with the tool to plan a driving trip. So one of our children recently moved to Anchorage. We're going to go up and visit her, and we're going to drive, right? So it's going to try to create the whole tour and everything, and asking it where to go and what to see, and maybe some ideas of where to stay. And now I know that because we pay for it, that I'm not getting advertised answer. Wouldn't it? Would it be telling me where to stay based on who's advertised? Would it tell me that I might want to buy a different car for that journey because Ford's incredible driving across that kind of terrain? You can see how this really becomes, sort of a sci-fi nightmare of tapping into you. So while we think that the context and the memory is one of the things that makes these tools so incredibly useful, it's also what makes it incredibly dangerous.
How fast do you think that the AI revolution is going to happen, in the sense that, when the internet came out, everybody was like, oh, everything's going to go online. And then that went bust around 2000 or 2000, which was more of a stock thing. But still, it took about 10 years really for everything to go online properly. How fast do you think the AI revolution, where people are it's a normal part of everyday life? I mean, ChatGPT is a normal part pretty much, or Claude, of everyday life for asking questions. I mean, it's the Google now of what everybody Googled instead now Chat GPTs. But I mean where it's actually um, enhanced over 20% of somebody's life. Or
I think yeah, I think it'll go much faster than the internet space for a couple of reasons. So the internet space, which I spent a lot of time in early on in that timeline, we described the dawn of the commercial internet was summer of 1995. That's when Netscape went public. So it was definitely a well-known understanding, sort of space. There were only 9 million people online at the time, right? So you were dealing with a tiny, tiny percentage of the world population who could be consumers of this new technology. We also didn't have anywhere near the capability to deliver. We didn't have the large servers. We didn't have broadband, which is why, you remember the little, when you had the 14.4 baud modems, like you couldn't get stuff to them, and you didn't have the technology to deliver things to you, and you didn't really know what to do with it. So, I mean, the first generation, a few years, is people just putting their brochures that they printed out on paper, and they put that on a web page, and that was kind of it. So there were so many things to line up. Different now is everyone has the capability to consume these things because everyone, or at least the vast majority of people on the planet have a phone. There's still plenty of people who are not connected, and that's another completely different situation and issue. But there's an enormous, I can't count the orders of magnitude more people who can use the tools. So the users are there. We don't have the capability to deliver it all. Part of that is, that's why we're doing all this massive, all the huge, I don't mean to say the industry in the world is building so many data centers to try and build up the capacity to deliver. I think the more interesting question for usage and for 20% of your life is when the models actually can operate and reside and work on your phone. So as we move more of the compute to the edge rather than the data center, that will make it a much bigger thing. But finally, the other thing is we still don't really know how to make these things that are usable. The chat systems that we're using today are basically mimicking iMessage. It's not like it was a great innovation to figure out how to have bubbles go back and forth and talk to each other. It's getting better. Integrations with new tools, capabilities, projects that you can do in Claude or the co-work or code. We're getting there. But it's still a messy journey to get to something where somebody might just use it, for a few hours a day, might have it in the background, might have it be something that helps them throughout their day, sort of thinking about organizing their schedule, for instance, something seemingly mundane, but potentially very useful. We haven't gotten to that level yet. Like that's another generation or so of design. There is most likely something that is going to be invented by somebody who's currently like 14, because some of these major breakthroughs that happen generally come a good number of years after the fundamental technology. So we had a very interesting conversation with a good friend of ours who's the guy who created the hashtag for Twitter, right? So, and we asked him this question about when he what he thought would be the great breakthrough, like the hashtag, which allowed that whole social media world to really take off. And he said, "Well, don't ask me, ask somebody who's 12, because they're the ones who are going to figure it out. Not now, but when they get older, like it's going to take another 10 years to find that truth."
Yeah.
So,
but there's an obvious missing part to this sort of glaring right now is
clearly I missed, even though it's obvious.
Well, you sort of said it. There isn't really support for taking you out of your own mind.
Yeah.
The lack of collaboration, and people can say that Copilot is a collaboration tool, but I think anyone who uses Copilot wouldn't necessarily agree with that. But it isn't really designed for human collective intelligence, and that our intelligence is a collective, and it's designed for one user and one model with a ton of agents. It's not designed for lots of humans trying to collaborate on a very complex problem.
Or even two. Like we can't have a work with Claude on a thing, as basically three, minds, if you will. It doesn't, but that's the way humans normally work, right? If we want to expand our ideas, we go grab a coffee with a friend and chat it out and talk about it. But it's additive.
And it's
Whereas,
clearly a technical thing. I mean,
yeah,
we've obviously used the ChatGPT version of that.
yeah,
We had a kind of combined conversation with ChatGPT in between us, and it's a very unusual sensation because I have my own voice in my head for how ChatGPT talks to me, and we've got one between two of us, and it feels like this weird threesome where you don't know which way up someone is in the bed. It's so bizarre. I mean, we're going to need the 12-year-old. Don't tell you that's right. We're going to need someone else to with an
yes,
imagination to
yes,
figure that collaboration out, because this is the thing. You have this mental model of something on the other side of the screen that is intelligent and working for you. And when they share their thoughts with someone else in that same chat, it's very unsatisfying.
yeah,
Because in this instance, we were trying to talk about, I know we were sitting somewhere in Wisconsin trying to figure out some travel thing, and preferences around, whether we were going to go and look at cheese or cows, something like that. And the problem is that the ChatGPT instance could access my preferences for looking at cheese and couldn't access his preferences for looking at cows. So it was, I'm giving you a false thing here, but you get the idea that there's an asymmetry. How does one model and one instance handle multiple other models and instances? And that is not clear to me how that's going to get resolved in a really satisfying way. There's a level of abstraction here that just hasn't happened yet.
I guess not in the short term. I mean, you never know what kind of
Well, there'll be breakthroughs. So that's
breakthroughs.
the point. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of the could be that the breakthrough is building the capacity for a machine to have a theory of mind. So
Right.
one of the reasons that, that's how we relate to each other as humans is we have, first of all, a fundamental theory of mind of other humans, but we start to develop well, I can tell, I know what she's thinking right now. Like, our kids will say that we actually communicate just with our eyes, but that's, that was when they lived at home and we had to communicate without them knowing, but we have this ability to understand other humans in a way that machines don't today. And so there's sort of an interesting question that whether if an AI could actually have a theory of mind about you and about me, then it might be able to keep us separate and keep us as individuals in its own space when it's creating, crafting whatever sort of conversation to have with two people at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's actually it'll be interesting to see how that does develop. I've never approached it from that angle, even thinking about it. I live alone, me and my dogs, so they're not big on the Chat GPT, not quite yet.
Our dog's really into ChatGPT. Like, she's down there right now like this.
Have you guys seen on TV it's an info thing. They've got an AI dog now, a robot dog that looks, barks, listens to commands that you give it like a dog would, and it's a dog robot.
Well, I don't believe everything you see on TV.
Maybe. I haven't ordered it, but maybe you're
Yeah.
right.
I think
I mean, it'd be good because it won't poop. I mean, that would be
Exactly.
lovely. I mean, honestly.
The theory of mind's really fascinating because we wrote this essay a while back that came out of some of our research, where a young man was highly indignant because he realized that his girlfriend had started feeding their fights into ChatGPT. And in the middle of a fight, she'd leave the room and then she'd come back with a better retort. And he was like, I don't want to fight with a robot. I want to fight with her. And she was just as indignant because she was, well, I thought you'd appreciate that I was working on my communication skills. And so here's this really interesting, quite simple, relatable case where both of them are completely right? They're both completely right. What's wrong? Well, what's wrong is the model in between them, in the sense that there's a space in between them where obviously there's a sort of a privacy issue, but it's more that she has a particular goal that she's trying to achieve, and his version of achieving that goal is not consistent with having a third in the space. Now, if the third of ChatGPT had understood that, might have been able to bridge that more effectively. So, and might have been able to see that he's over here on one hill and she's over there on another hill, and give them a path to each other in a way that was more able to make them recognize that they were literally sort of talking across each other. You could see there'd be real value in that.
Mhm.
How would you architect that? How would you build that? Whose phone does it sit on? These are complicated problems. And I don't think that, I mean, you can see that there's a design space here that really no one's thought that deeply about, except
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of got my mind going big time. Now, what human skill or experience do you think AI might quietly erase from our culture? Talking about relationships.
No, honestly, I think writing. I don't think we're going to go back to being pre-literate, but I think that there'll be far fewer people who are sort of B plus A minus writers, and it'll sort of hollow out the writing skill. And because it's just so easy to use them for writing, we still write and we still communicate in so much written word, and we're all getting much more used to reading AI generated language and not really caring. And that's fine. I'd only care when I feel like someone has been so unbelievably lazy that they don't care about what they wrote. Otherwise, I can see through the sort of the AI structure and it doesn't really bother me too much. It allows me to sort of read a bit faster. But I do think that one of sometimes you wonder who you're writing for because so many people just take what you've got and put it into AI and say, give me a summary. So I do think that writing is a skill that's deeply under threat. How we think if we don't write, there's scholars that have thought about this a lot. And one scenario is we go back to the pre-literate era. I don't think that's going to happen because I think there's just too much structure around writing. But I do think we'll end up with quite a different value system around writing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there will always be great writers. I was reflecting earlier, like particularly like reading stuff that Clive Thompson writes. Just love his voice. Love the way he puts words together. It's fantastic.
Well, he was the one that came up with rewilding the
Yes,
imagination, right?
yes,
Used that for years.
yeah,
I
it's
mean, it's just
fantastic,
wonderful.
and he's got a beautiful turn of phrase, really interesting concepts. I don't think that AI will ever affect him in that it is so uniquely him, and he's one of those unbelievable all-star kind of writers. And there's always room for that. It's that there's a lot of people that are kind of mid writers. And they're fine with that. They don't. I'm not trying to be
It
critical of
comes to an end.
it's a thing that I gotta do, so I gotta write it. I think that the interesting question is how will we think thoroughly and how will we communicate thoroughly? And the problem with that is we're trying to imagine a state that we don't understand. But it's important to remember that we have communicated thoroughly in very different ways in just somewhat recent periods of time. I mean, I like thinking about it was the Lincoln Douglas debates that I remember reading about not long ago, where they would start off with, I think, a 2-hour, monologue, and then the other would respond for an hour, and then they would go back and respond again for an hour. These things were epic, right? So, who today can actually talk that long themselves and make enough sense that someone could actually respond in that level of depth?
Cory
Like
Booker,
the
he stood there for 24
orators.
hours.
Yes,
The bus
but
scene.
also who can actually sit and listen to it? Because the citizens would sit and listen to political debates like this. They were not unique, but I think they stood out in history. But they would sit and listen for several hours, right? That doesn't exist anymore. That kind of contemplation, that kind of ordering, that kind of thinking so clearly and then speaking as if you had written an entire essay, or in their case, almost a book. We don't do that anymore. We think clearly and we communicate deeply in different ways. And this happens, this happened throughout, if you think sort of Marshall McLuhan sort of mindset, this has happened every time we shift media, it changes how we communicate. The medium is the message. It changes how we communicate, which is basically how we message each other. It's unclear the effect that this tool will have. Number one, it's the first medium we have ever created that actually creates a message itself, right? It's the first time that it's not just shaping a human message to another human, but we will continue to communicate with each other. We're just not sure how.
Yeah, when historians look back, what do you think they're going to say that we humans got right on this, and what do you think they're going to say that we got wrong on this?
I struggle to find what I think where to point to evidence of what I think we're getting right. First of all, I'll step back and I'll say something that Helen likes to say, which is that the Transformers, what is one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the century. So the underlying technology behind these models and its ability to find patterns in language that we didn't understand. But we can use transformers to find patterns in weather and in physical systems. It doesn't learn physics, but it sees the patterns. And that will be, I think, something that we will discover as something that was really right, if you will, because of the power of it and what we can do. What I worry in terms of what we really got wrong is that AI is a cultural technology. And every culture you put it in, it just amplifies it. And what I worry about is the broad-based amplification of an increasingly extractive and unequal outcome of capitalism. And that would be the ultimate got it wrong, is that we put it into the system and allowed it to just set it on fire. And we didn't stop and go, wait a second, maybe that's not the outcome we want from this.
Yeah, I mean, you could get a little bit spicy on this and say, well, it depends who writes the history, because fast forward and
Claude's writing all the history?
No, and I was thinking that, a certain billionaire who shares a passport with me could be the one writing history and everything is perfectly correct.
It's delayed as it comes back from Mars.
Yeah, well, he's uploaded his brain to the cloud and what have you. The other one is, fast forward and we've managed to freeze Bernie, and Bernie Sanders says, and he's writing the history, and he had been part of a legacy of sort of, he's been talking about many of these things for very many years, and many people have latched on to that and they've been worried about that. And the two ends of the spectrum, I don't sit at either of those ends, but the two ends of that spectrum are kind of embodied in both of those individuals right now. The clear articulation of power, concentration of power, inequality, surveillance, authoritarianism or techno-authoritarianism versus a worker-driven democracy and something that's closer to socialism and UBI. Those are kind of the two ends of the spectrum.
And I think there's also I'd put it in what I would like to see as the right outcome, because we tend to approach this from more of a meta-modern approach, is that we find ways to use this technology for us. We're not making it to take from us, but we're making it for us. And it expands our capabilities to tackle problems we're not tackling today, to find opportunities that we're not finding today because we don't have the time or we don't have the capability.
Well, we can't see into that data.
We can't see it.
One of the things that I think is pretty clear that we will have got right is that what the transformer learns and the way that it captures the structure of the world is incredibly powerful. It's showing it in language, it's showing it in proteins, it's showing it in weather, it's showing it in physics on electric grids. It learns a statistical set of relationships that we can then use to do things quite differently. And so that I think we've got right. Underestimating the complexity of what it takes for humans to take that information and turn it into something that's truly useful in the world, that is the bit where we need to get better attuned to how this is how it gets done. It doesn't get done with more AI. It doesn't get done with more robots. It gets done with humans and AI together. And that's really our major mission, is to shift that narrative so that we can see, that more people can see that when you put this AI intelligence, and right now the language models and various other things that the transformer has learned, with the human intelligence that is embodied, situated in the world, has stakes, wants to stay alive, very much wants to stay alive. When you put those two together, you get something really rich. You really expand the possibility space and you expand the meaning of that possibility space. So AI gives us that breadth, that combinatorial reach, that amazing ability to put a telescope onto things we've never been able to see before, a microscope onto things we've never been able to see before. But it's the humans who make the meaning. It's the humans that figure out, well, this matters. We want to do this. This is the way we're going to take the world. And that part of the conversation, that's the bit that humans need to grab and own, that part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It leads me to my last question. I know you guys have a hard stop. And Helen was saying to me, you've got a beautiful family and that you had these conversations with your kids as they were growing up and choosing careers, etc. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the things you said, the conversations, the types of conversations, and and the different ways of thinking about this if you're a young adult. For me, if I were a young adult, I'd be learning every single AI app I possibly could, because I do believe that there is room for an AI agency, like there was a digital marketing agency, but literally an AI agency, because older people that own businesses, I mean, there's younger people that own businesses too, but you don't have the time to learn all of these tools that can otherwise help you. But also what you just touched on, which is there is going to be a voice. There is going to be how to manage that voice, no different than managing your storytelling on Instagram. There is going to be that. But anyway, going back to my question, what did you talk about with your kids? How do you sort of broach this conversation with young adults and what's happening in career choices with where the world is today in tech?
Do you want to do
The starting point?
Yeah.
Well, the story that you're referencing is that when we first got into AI, which was more than 10 years ago now, our oldest kids were in that sort of getting ready to think about college phase. And this was during the big deep learning boom, 15-ish. And there was a lot of conversation with some big studies about what the automation exposure would be across the population and how many jobs would be exposed to automation risk. And the kind of questions they had was, well, what should I study if all this is going to happen, or does it matter? Like, should I go to college at all? Like, does that happen at all? And that got us to go, well, maybe we should really go figure this out. And we did a deep dive as part of our early phase on that same question of what's the risk to employment. So at the time, there was a very important study out of Oxford and one out of McKinsey. And we did all the same analysis in a different way. We had our own assumptions about different kinds of technology progression, and we looked at it from a different way. But we crunched the same big, massive data set from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which crashed Excel on me multiple times because I really should have been using something more than Excel, but it was just kind of what I got stuck in. And we came up with our own sort of answers. And then we flipped it on its head. And we said, well, if this is all possible to be automated, what's not? And you end up with a few categories of things that are really important, like relating to physical world. We called it bugs and bad things, were these sort of interesting things around sort of complex microorganisms. There's issues with the physical world, which was around sort of dealing with physical spaces, because AI is difficult to look at well, how do you think about putting that building on that hill with the other things that are happening around and all that, like anything that is non-standardized. There were a few categories. The basic premise came down to is that humans are really good at unpredictable and machines are pretty good at predictable. That makes sense. They're operating off of data that existed. And if there's enough pattern predictability in that data, they're pretty good at it. But whenever there's anything that's unpredictable, that's where we're really good. And that unpredictability can be, what will people like? You're in the fashion business. Like, what are people going to like next year? I'm not the one to ask, but somebody is, right? Like, but that's a fundamentally unpredictable thing that humans are really good at to try and figure out where the zeitgeist might go, that kind of an idea, right? So we encourage them in that way. What's interesting is I don't think they really listen to us. I think we like to think that they listen to us, but just by happenstance, they've ended up in dealing with healthcare, mechanical engineering, ones in glaciology, studying glaciers. We've got physical event production systems and lighting. Like, we've got all kinds of really interesting things that actually fall into those buckets. Again, not taking credit for our children's choices. Well, I know they didn't listen to me at all.
I think they read our report.
Yeah, I'm sure they study.
And they
it.
said,
That's in the kid chat when the five of them are sitting there chatting. So I'm sure they're referencing everything that we say. I'm going to say that just now so that if any of them actually listen to this, they have to say something to me. But we'll see. But I think that you're good. It's a good question. What to children? What can kids really do? There is one angle, which is learn as much as possible about AI, learn all the tools, try and become an expert at all of that. Right. The other is that AI is going to be really good at automating a certain amount of things that are predictable. And a lot of those things are driven in this sort of idea of efficiency. So I know how to do this thing. It's repeatable enough that I can delegate it. And so I give it to a machine to go do, right? But then there's the idea of exploring and finding things to pursue that matter. And when you can think about what matters, that's really only a human thing. What matters to you is different what matters to me. What matters to the world sometimes is what matters to me. And that's lovely. When we're creating things and we put it out in the world and we realize that it matters to somebody else, sometimes it isn't. But understanding what really matters to you and having a passion about that and being able to do the thing that you really care about. I know it sounds very trite, but it is actually the fundamental part of what's distinguishing us in terms of what we can do that's fundamentally requires a human, sometimes with the machine, to really do, right? I mean, how many people actually design much of anything without a computer at all right now? Right? The vast majority of it is using a machine to express that creativity and to make what matters to you. But there's something along those lines. I wish I had a top 3 or 10 list for kids to follow because it's kind of hard. But the reality is we humans are unique and interesting and messy and beautiful. And that's all because what matters to us is individual. And so that's kind of the best coaching I have, which
Yeah, and I think that, the stay the author of your own mind. And for young people, you don't know what stay means because you haven't started to author your own mind much anyway. So what does that mean? It means be aware of how you're using AI. What role are you putting it into? You outsourcing everything? Are you trying to learn using AI? Are you just trying to get something done? But just be aware of that. The second one is to show some choices and agency over that. Say, I'm using it because I want to get smarter at this, or I'm using it because I actually just don't give a stuff about this and I want to get it off my plate as fast as possible.
or as our college senior recently said, I'm choosing not to use this because I want to learn how to do this myself first.
Yeah, I want to struggle. I want to learn
That's a choice.
first. Yeah,
You can choose to use and choice
absolutely.
not to use. That is choice.
And the last one is staying accountable to others, because the people that do the best in our research are the ones who consistently have some sort of grounding in either a professional standard or a person who knows them well and says, I think you're spending too much time talking to ChatGPT, you should be talking to me, or that in a work situation that you're able to explain your reasoning.
Yeah, it's, in my school for fashion design, even for our interior design program and our graphic design, it's fundamental. And I did it this way where they learn they learn how to sketch by hand first. So we have a lot of students that come, and of course, Adobe Illustrator, do you teach Illustrator? We do teach Illustrator, but you're going to learn by hand first because there's so much fundamental stuff you're just going to skip when you go to Illustrator that you're never going to have the foundation to be able to do all the wonderful things you can do in Illustrator without knowing this first.
Yeah, you got to develop that statistical learning, that embodied sensation, that intuition. The hard part about advice to young people right now is that everyone knows that learning in that statistical, mundane, repetitive, build up a sense in your body over time as you do things is really important. Whether it's driving a car or sketching or learning how to be a lawyer, you have to do that. AI is taking away all of that. That output can all be produced. Someone, Waymo can drive your car. Many, many things, including ChatGPT, can develop legal briefs. You can have Adobe Illustrator do it. So the question is, how do you do that baseline statistical learning that is from the mundane, apprenticeship-based kind of learning? No one really knows the answer to that right now. I think that the people who are under pressure for this right now, the people who can't get jobs because AI has taken that layer in law and accounting and some of the other roles, coding, computer coding, they will be off doing something entrepreneurial and they'll be figuring it out in a different way. I don't think the answer is known yet. I think it's still yet to emerge how humans are going to learn those skills if they're not able to do them in some sort of structured way.
Yeah, I had a really great conversation with my developer, and he's out of Idaho. The most amazing developer I have ever worked with. He understands front end and back end, so which makes his coding so great. But he said, our industry is completely being turned upside down. But he does feel as well, though, that there's other things that are going to be opening up. They're just sort of in this kind of.
They're not there yet.
They're not there yet. Yeah. Well, I can't thank both of you enough. This has been like brain breaking for me. I'm used to drawing and sketching. This has been fantastic.
Excellent.
Well, nice to meet you, and thank you for having us on.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It was great meeting you both, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Same here.
All right. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.